Hello everyone, welcome to a book bag extra. I'm reporting on the recent Stokey Literary Festival, one of my very, very favourite festivals. Here's the bag. It's from a few years ago, so the image on the front is not the venue that they're currently operating from, which is the amazing Mildmay Club in Newington Green, which has been a great venue for the events, and the meeting house next door, famed for its connection to Mary Wollstonecraft, of course. And every time I go to Stoke Newington, I'm afraid I have to look at that dreadful silver thing in the park that represents Mary Wollstonecraft, apparently. We've waited so many years for a statue for her, and it's a very strange thing indeed, but quite funny. Anyway, on to the festival. It really is one of my favourites of the whole year. Grabbed a programme. The first event I did, and I've done this event for about 3 years running, is Rising Stars, where we get a panel of debut novelists, and I have to kind of tease out various themes from books that are really incredibly different, all chosen by the festival director, Liz Vater. So she makes me work, does Liz, but I love it. So the authors that I was talking to there, just get this stuff out of the way. Miranda Pountney, How to Be Somebody Else. Yeah. The Borrowed Hills by Scott Preston. Fervour by Tony Lloyd. And A Person is a Prayer by Amakalia. And we had quite an interesting discussion about things like how you pick a cover. Do you have any input into the cover? What do you think of the cover? Various things about how you get published, agenting, all that kind of thing. So Person is a Prayer. I teased Amar a little bit by saying that I'd never read a book that had so many references to going to the toilet, being worried about going to the toilet, being worried about finding a toilet. But this is a large family that sets off to India. They go to Benares to scatter the ashes of a family member, and it's a wonderful scenario. This is actually his picture. He took that photograph during a very similar family trip that he took. But it's a great device for a novel because it brings together sort of family trauma, family history. There's sort of looks at different decades and how people set out in a certain way, thinking that their life is going to be a certain way, and it doesn't end up like that. So it's a moment of reflection on the bank of the Ganges. Thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's A Person is a Prayer. We had a little bit of a laugh about the cover of this sort of woman with red hair, because Toby said, yeah, they're really trying to make the book look like some kind of conflagration. So further, a sort of link between the two really is religious belief or lack of religious belief, or families who are supposed to all believe one thing and don't all believe one thing. But in this case, it's Orthodox Judaism, and it's about a young man who's a fascinating character. He's never quite explained. He's as mysterious at the end as he is at the beginning. I can't find the name actually, but I couldn't. Tovia, yeah. I had to ask Toby how it was pronounced, and then I completely forgot, as you can see. But he's a fascinating young man who is militantly atheist, despite being brought up in a religious family, and his sister is deeply, deeply troubled. And the thrust of the story really is that the way the family frames her illness is that she has been taken over by a demon. So there's lots of interesting stuff in there about Jewish folklore, Dibbuks, the golem, and some seriously weird stuff going on. And Toby said, well, I had to deal with the immaterial world in dealing with a novel that is about religion and how you come to grips with your religion, because it is about the immaterial world. So fascinating. I loved The Borrowed Hills, Scott Preston's book, that is deeply anti-romantic about the Lake District. It's set in the 80s. And in fact, he said rather interestingly, it's my grandfather's book, but I don't think his grandfather could possibly have got up to all the scrapes that the people do in this book. It's a tale of sheep rustling. I have the proof here, but the jacket, we did talk about the jacket, and actually we'll get on to this with Miranda's book. We talked about the fashion for having women, headless women. Well, there you go. You know, women where you can't see their faces. Anyway, Scott's book just has a sheep. Because it's about sheep rustling. It's quite Tarantino-esque. Just, it turns out to be not a simple thing, just going over and helping yourself to somebody else's sheep. There is a lot about sheep which almost become characters in the book. I said, how are you with sheep, Scott? And he said, oh, you know, I'm okay, about the same as I am with people, really. He was very droll, very dry. Anyway, just, I love that book, but maybe don't take it on holiday if you're going to the Lake District. You'll be just sort of looking round for the guns and the mayhem and the dodgy characters. There's some great lines in that book as well. It's talking a little bit about gentrification, not gentrification, touristification, which is obviously a big deal if you actually live and work somewhere like the Lake District. And there's a line in it that goes something like, it was really nice around here before they made it all nice. And then there's another reference, which I mentioned in the event, that if you know a man who breeds ferrets, that man will be able to get you anything. You know, whether it's a dormobile, a beat up truck, set of wrought iron gates, or a gun. So there you go. I don't know anybody who breeds ferrets, but I thought that was a great bit of life advice. And then Miranda's wonderful, funny book, well, sort of dryly funny book, How to Be Somebody Else. A young woman goes to New York and is very much a fish out of water. She is flat sitting somewhere that's much too expensive for her to be able to afford herself, and gets to know the neighbours rather too well. And that's sort of roughly the setup. But I teased her a little bit about sex scenes, which she said, well, there's not much sex in it. And I said, we're trying to sell this book, Miranda. So we had a bit of a laugh about that. Yes, there's not much sex in it, but it's very well written. And it's sort of extraordinary, really. It sort of moves beyond Dylan, the central character's sort of woes and what she thinks about life, into a kind of broader sort of what it's like to live in the big city and feel a sort of small, insignificant person, and to be at a point in your life where you don't really know where it's going to go. So maybe that is the theme we could bring together from the four great debut novels. Loved talking to them. And then I kind of wandered off. I didn't stay at the festival the whole time, but I came back for a memoir event. And that was with Catherine Taylor, who has been interviewed on the book bag. So you know all about her wonderful memoir, The Stirrings, a memoir in Northern Time. And Natasha Walter, Before the Light Fades. And the theme here, I was sort of given the theme, which is writing about protest. What are the values we imbibe from our parents? Because memoirs are often about, you know, growing up. Catherine's is. Natasha's is slightly different. It's about the death of her mother, Ruth, the very sudden death of her mother, Ruth, who, a very capable person in many ways, decided to end her life, but and gave clues, but it suddenly happened, and Natasha had to come to terms with it, find out about her mother's life, look through everything that you inherit, and her mother was a very committed 60s radical in the C&D movement, and putting together that story. So they both went together incredibly well. And the funny thing is, I don't think they'd met. And I left them in the green room afterwards to go to another event. When I came back, they were still talking. So, I mean, they're probably still talking somewhere. Both fascinating documents of protest, passion, pride, and what we do in the situation that we find ourselves in now. So, great books. So I said I'd gone off to do something else. I then went to, did I, I'm looking at the programme now. I went to, I'll be there in a minute, I'll get there. I went to an event, Richard King, talking about his book about Arthur Russell. And Arthur Russell is a musician that I knew nothing about, but I'd heard interesting things. In fact, I asked a friend who's a fan, well, where should I start with Arthur Russell? And he just went, well, I don't know. It's all so varied. I can't really recommend anything. And then he sent me a few clips that were very strange indeed. So I just went to this event. I went with my mate, Andy Beckett of The Guardian, who'd just done a previous event, or was going to do an event. Getting very temporally confused here. So we went along to that. And I came out of it not much clearer about who or what Arthur Russell. Well, I learned about him, not so much about his music. I think the big takeaway was that somebody who had a very troubled life and didn't earn very much money also helped out other people and collaborated with other people. Supremely generous soul. But had an amazing work ethic. Apparently, he just never stopped working, tinkering on his music, tinkering with other people's music. So it was a very mellow hour of sort of, wow, I don't really know what any of this is about. I mean, there weren't any clips played, I don't think. So, but I really enjoyed it. I'll have to go and investigate Arthur Russell's music. I mean, it did make me feel that he's clearly a fascinating person. And then, I went off to Jukebox. No, that was on Sunday. Right, so that was it. I think I was done. Oh, no, I went to see The Secret Tory. I went to see the second half of The Secret Tory, who's somebody called Henry Morris. Again, I just sort of drop into these things and I don't really know where I'm going or what I'm doing, but he was hilariously good fun. I think they'd done the Secret Tory bit in the first half. So the second half was all about his adventures being an ultra marathoner and also a fitness instructor. And he's Caitlin Moran's fitness instructor. And she was interviewing him and at one point did a plank. Didn't look to be a very... I don't know, it looks a bit of a sloppy plank to me. I'm a bit of a planker myself, but anyway, it was a really fun event. He was completely hilarious. So the Secret Tory is something else I'll have to find out about. We whiz on to the next day when I was doing a couple of things. Well, I was sort of dropping into things. So I went to... what did I go to? I went to Jukebox Fury. So Jukebox Fury is a regular thing, like the Rising Stars. It's on every year. It is hosted in inimitable fashion by Richard Boone, and it's three musicians who each nominate hit or miss. It's that old idea. They talk about a track that means something to them, means something special to them, and then there's a vote about hit or miss. So it was rather a good lineup. So Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth turned up, Helen O'Hara, the wonderful violinist from Dexy's Midnight Runners, and I didn't know this, chaps, Michael Cragg, author of Reach for the Stars, Fame, Fallout and Pop's Final Party. And he and Thurston Moore had a little bit of a kind of what you might call a height off, because Thurston said something like, I'm always the tallest guy at these events, and you might be even taller than I am. So two big lads for sure. I thought Michael was completely hilarious. He was so droll and funny. and his musical choice was Björk. And what he said about that was that he was so into the Jackson 5 and Janet Jackson and all things Jackson, he never listened to anything else when he was a kid, and then he suddenly made this swerve into Björk. Helen O'Hara nominated a great Roxy music track that actually has a violin solo. And I mean, she was rather wonderful and modest and sweet, and said, "It's so good, I don't think I could play that." And Thurston, oh yes, it was Louie Louie. Yeah, the original, I don't know if it is the original, but the famous Louie Louie, which he listened to when he was about 5, and it set him on his musical path. And Richard Boone is extremely good at keeping, lippy musicians in their place, keeping the whole thing moving on, being very dry, very droll, totally hilarious. And all the tracks were hits. Doesn't always happen, but it was this time. Then I wanted to pop into Nathan Evans' incandescent queer soiree, because it's always such good fun and he's such a brilliant host. But I didn't really get a chance, A, because I bumped into a friend, and B, because Doon McKeehan, whose event I was chairing, she was the culmination of the festival, the big last number in the wonderful hall at the Mildmay. And Doon sort of turned up really early and hung out and chatted and was fantastically good fun. Everybody loved her so much. She was so nice. And sometimes if you get people who are famous for other things and they're not bookie people, they might turn up 2 minutes before and sort of go, "Oh, a chair? What's that mean? You're going to ask me questions? I don't need a chair." They're all a bit like that. Doon could not have been more different. So she was super fun in the green room. We were talking about our love of Led Zeppelin. Actually, that came out of the Jukebox Fury. We were talking about songs that we would nominate. Actually, I think the song I would nominate would be by Killing Joke, and everybody would hate it, but that's another story. So we went on stage and talked about her book, which is called My Lady Parts. It's incredibly funny, but at the beginning she has a sort of disclaimer where she says, "It's, you're not going to get anecdotes about this famous person I know, and I'm not going to say anything about that incident." So although she did tell us a few of those excised stories at the event, it's really a fascinating book. I mean, it's very funny, as you might expect. It's very interesting about the acting industry and how actors are treated. But the main thrust of it is about protecting young actresses if they are having to do things like act a rape scene, or even a sex scene, can be quite difficult to do. And she sort of steps up on set as a kind of senior lady and says, yeah, she's not doing that, or yeah, why does this have to be in? Duna's had to do it for herself, and she's had difficult experiences. They're all recounted in the book. I mean, one of the fascinating things is about being the feed, where you're just there. This was her early years in comedy, working with all the big names we know, but even alternative comedy had pretty gals whose job it was to they say the line, "It isn't the funny line, but the male comedian can come back boom." So that was all fascinating, how she fought her way out of that little trap in things like Smack the Pony. Great audience, completely full audience, as you can imagine. And Stokey people always come out for their festival, always have great questions. I mean, all the way through, people had fantastic questions. And it's just a joy to be involved in the festival. And then lovely signing queue for Doon. I hung out in the green room a little bit longer and then sort of scooched my way into the wrap party, which is really for all the wonderful volunteers that you see around all weekend with their pink crew T-shirts on. I've always secretly lusted after one of them, but I'm not crew, so I don't deserve it. But props to everyone involved. I mean, it goes so smoothly, and yet it still has this air of fun and anarchy, and we're kind of making it up as we go along. But they're seriously not. It's brilliantly orchestrated by Liz, who just kind of sits behind a computer in the green room 24/7, it seems. I, at the end of Stokey, I always just think, oh, I just can't wait for next year. It's an absolute highlight. So my next festival adventure is going to be the Idler, and I'm looking forward to telling you all about that in due course. So I hope you enjoyed this little roundup. Literary festivals forever. Support them, promote them, love them, enjoy them while we still have them. Thanks very much for watching.